Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. I'm Susan Weinschenk, and I'm the webinar host today. So let me just do a few housekeeping things. We do have everyone muted on this because we've got quite a few people on, but you can talk to us via the chat window. So use the chat window, and actually use the chat window, not the questions window. On your panel, you may see both, and we're going to use chat today. So as we go along, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, you can type into chat. You can type it to the entire audience or to just the organizer. That would be me. And we'll be taking Q&A. We're going to have actually two places today where we do Q&A, kind of in the middle and then at the end. So please do type in your questions as we go along. I think some of you may know me. I am a consultant and an author and a speaker. I have a company which we call the Team W. I have a PhD in psychology, and I'm a behavioral scientist working in the psychology of design and in the field of user experience. And I also have with me today on our webinar Dr. Jeff Horvath. And Jeff is a UX strategic consultant. He has his own company. He's president of Balanced Experience. And Jeff specializes in two things. One is user experience project work, but also building UX capability inside of organizations. And Jeff, you there?
I'm here. Hi everybody.
Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Be fun.
So I am going to record the webinar today, and everyone that is attending, you'll get an email afterwards that'll give you a link to that recording. And one other thing before we get started, we're going to have, we have a special offer, right, Jeff, for everyone?
We do, yes.
And we'll be talking about that after the Q&A about midway through. All right, so today's topic, growing UX capabilities in your organization. And Jeff, I have a question kind of to start us off. I have a question for
absolutely.
you. So are a lot of organizations growing user experience? I mean, I know that there's a lot of organizations that have UX groups. And I'm wondering, today as we talk, are we talking primarily about organizations that want to grow, and then how are there a lot of those grow their UX group, or are we also talking about organizations that maybe don't really have a UX group yet? So are you going to concentrate on one more than another as we go through our talk today?
Well, there's lots of parts to that question. So yeah, I guess I would say there are a lot of organizations nowadays that are really trying to build up their UX capabilities, trying to figure out what it means to build up their UX capabilities. I'm seeing that in a lot of different places. I'm seeing it with large Fortune 100 kinds of organizations that are trying to figure out how to do this bigger and better. But I'm also seeing it in smaller organizations that are just trying to figure out how to do it at all, or how to do it in a different way that fits the culture of a small organization. So lots of different kinds of organizations are doing it, and I'll address things at all ends of the spectrum at some point today. I hope. Okay. Depends on how our conversation goes, but yeah, it's pervasive.
Yeah, and I'd be interested for those of you who are on the webinar, if you want to just type me a message on chat, and that would be a message to the organizer. I'd be kind of interested in knowing how many of you are in an organization that has an official UX group and you're trying to grow it, and how many of you are in an organization where maybe there isn't even an official group. Maybe you're a UX person of one. I'd be kind of interested in that. So you can just type that in on chat, and we'll just get a little informal survey here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's dive in, Jeff. We've got 5 things that we're going to talk about, and we're also going to have we're also going to include at the end, mistakes to avoid, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you want to grow your UX. So I've heard you say
Mhm.
that if you want to grow UX in a smart way, you have to concentrate on process, not project.
Right.
So, what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is, and I've seen this happen before, trying to approach um, the creation of UX as a corporate capability, trying to do that in terms of projects. Whether it's, let's set up a project to set up a team, or let's have a project to define our roadmap, or whatever. And that I've never seen that work. So I've seen lots of different attempts at it. I've had clients where we've done that round and round again. I've even, I've been in places where we've said, well, that kind of project doesn't seem to help clients, or this kind of project does, and just going round and round. It never really gets enough traction. So when you approach kind of organizational change as a project, what I've found is you're never really able to get into enough detail, and you're never able to be as flexible as you need to be in order to make change happen. So to me, it's a process. It's the process of getting from point A to point B. It's setting goals and understanding the different dimensions you need to work on. And of course, there's projects along the way, but the whole thing itself is better viewed as a process than a project.
And I know that you work with a lot of, and I do too, work with a lot of, large companies,
Mhm.
Fortune 1000. And so, do you think that if you say, well, if you talk about growing UX in your organization um, as a project, that mean in a lot of these large companies, does that mean something? Does process really mean something different than project? Do people even think about it that way?
Sometimes, and sometimes it's as simple as, or as practical as, it's a different funding model. So
Hmm.
sometimes, we can fund a project, we can get it done. You're in here, you work for 12 weeks or whatever, and you got some deliverables, and you're out the door, and then, hopefully something good will happen after that. That's sometimes perceived or treated differently than a process where we need to get embedded with the UX vision, the goals, the strategic goals of the organization, and really figure out what's the right way to make this happen. And that's something that it's real hard to do in a discrete project. You really do need to kind of understand the how the machine works at an organization
Yeah.
in order to figure out what's the right way to make this change.
But I would think also that it's if you want to grow UX in your
Mm-hmm.
organization and you're going to do it as a process, not a project, it sounds like that might be like a harder thing initially. I mean, because it's like, well, if I just kind of do it as a project, I can get a little bit of funding and but if I'm going to really do it as a process, if I'm really going to do, as you said, tie it into the larger strategic goals, that's more challenging, and that means I have to, for instance, have support higher
Mm-hmm.
up, right?
Absolutely, and the higher up support really is critical, and I think maybe we'll get to that as our next topic here. But it is. I don't want to say that there's never projects. Certainly, there are projects that go into doing this. So you may
Hmm.
have projects to set up your standards, or projects to define your methods, or projects to do, to demonstrate some capabilities or whatnot. So there are projects that go along with it, but the totality of it all, I think, is important to understand that it's a process of maturing. It's a process of changing the culture.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about it. I was thinking of it kind of either or. You think of it like a process or you think of it like a
Uh-huh.
project. But what you just said is, think about growing UX as a process and get in at that process level in the organization. But then within that, if you're growing UX, you may also have projects that help you grow, like you said, standards or training or
Mhm.
whatever else it is. Yeah,
Right,
that's
right.
an interesting way to think of it. So have you found that this works? Like, do you have experience with doing it, this way, thinking about it at a process level? And did that really work better than some of your clients that did it more at a project level? And I'm not going to ask you necessarily to name names, right?
Right, we won't name names, but yeah,
Okay.
definitely. I'll not name a name here. I've got a client that I've worked with for a number of years now, and we, either my current organization or previous organizations I was at, we would work with people and kind of go in as a project and try to establish something, or give some tangible deliverables, et cetera. And that was very exciting. lots of energy when we were there, but kind of fell flat after we left. And we come back 6 months later and do another one. Let's get it going again, or let's talk to another part of the organization. We'll do it again, and round, project, and that over the course of a couple of years, it was only when I began to engage with the client, kind of almost as an advisor in an embedded way, to really kind of get in there and become part of the process, and not treat it as we're going to give you a set of deliverables in a couple of weeks or a couple of months, but here's the journey, here are the things we need to work on, let's figure out the best way to do this, and let's treat this as part of your organizational change, not as a project. And that's been a lot more successful.
I don't know if you've ever found this. I had a client, this may have even been true with more than one client, but this one client sticks in my mind. Mm-hmm. I had done that kind of, they wanted to grow UX, and so I came in and we trained people, and I did some mentoring, and we got their UX, flow going, etc. And then it stayed there for a couple of years, and I was involved a little bit, and then there was a major reorg, and the whole group mm-hmm. disappeared. And then a couple of years later, I was called in again, same company by a different group, and we did it all over again. And actually, this went on for literally decades. And I remember at one point I was giving, I had been asked to come in and speak to a group of managers at the company, mm-hmm. I was talking about, user experience in general. And the managers got really excited, and they said, we should have a UX group in our company. And I just looked at them, and I kind of asked the group, how long have you guys been with this company? And it turns out they were all, some of them had been there, 5 years, 7 years. But I had gone back literally decades, and I don't mm-hmm. want to make myself sound old, but it's true. And so none of them knew that. And I said, you may not realize this, but you had a UX group at this company 3 times. Yeah. And it's never survived longer than that. And they were really shocked to find that out. But I think it was because of what you're saying. I mean, every time it was just like a group within the larger organization that was kind of treating it like a project. So I think that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, sometimes I say there's kind of 3 things, and there's people, there's projects, and there's processes, if you want to be alliterative, but more I'd probably call it infrastructure. And I say, your people are going to change. They'll get promoted, to get a different job, they'll go work somewhere else, whatever. So people are going to change. Your projects are short term. It's only if you can get the infrastructure put in place, that's when I think I'm confident that something's going to stick. So if you're just doing projects, you're just bringing in talented people, that's a short-term fix.
Yeah.
But when I look at an organization, I say, all right, they've got the DNA now to do this right, and if the people leave, it's still part of the organization. That's when I feel good.
Yeah, and I do know I have some other clients who did it more in this process way, and although the groups have changed a lot over the years, and maybe even changed where they're located mm-hmm. In the organization, there's still user experience work going on in the organization because of this. Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, so that's number 1. Mm-hmm. It's a process, not a project. Right. And for those of you, because I think we've had a few people that have joined us since we started, let me just say that I have on the line Dr. Jeff Horvath, and we're talking about growing UX. We just finished talking about the first of the 5, that growing UX is a process, not a project. And we're now going to tackle number 2 of the 5. And then after the 5, we're also going to talk about mistakes to avoid. And I'll also remind you that we're going to stop in the middle and again at the end for questions and answers. So if you have questions, please type them to the organizer in the chat window. I'm the organizer, and I will ask those questions. And also that we're going to have a special offer for you that we'll talk about shortly. Okay, Jeff, let's tackle the next one.
Yeah, definitely.
It takes great leadership. So I talk about this one a lot with my clients, about the fact that you have to have high-level support in the organization if user experience is going to be successful in the organization. And you know what I found, and I'm guessing you have found too, is that if you don't have that, if you don't have someone high up in the organization who is a champion for you, what I find is you tend to have the team stays small. It's hard to grow. Often they feel like they're just spinning round and round. They're maybe they're brought in to do certain things, be involved in certain types of projects or certain phases of a project. Like they tend to do a lot of user testing. They tend to evaluate products, after they've already been somewhat developed, and they just can't get any traction. And so, have you found this to be true as well?
Absolutely, yeah. I think, I bet everybody on this call and most everybody we would talk to, if you talk to a UX practitioner or a UX team, everybody there is going to say, we need to do more UX, we need to do better UX, and we need to make it a more important part of the company. And there's always excitement and energy from the ground up to make UX better. But if you don't have some sort of executive leadership, a sponsor or whatnot, who understands that this is really important and is willing to put their organizational influence behind making it successful, then you can pick your metaphor. You're swimming upstream, really, and you may get a little success in one place, and then you backtrack, and a little success in another place, and you backtrack, and you just don't have the level of influence and support to make it happen. So, I had a client years ago where we came in to try to do this kind of work, and we made the mistake of going in there with the kind of only having, like, I'll call it project level sponsorship. So there was some things going on at the organization. The organization wanted to do some things. The UX leader positioned what we wanted to do as supporting that larger goal. It's a great thing, but that meant that the executive leadership they were not the ones bringing us in. So honestly, we got in and kicked things off and had a nice kickoff conversation, and the whole thing just about came to a screeching halt because the executive said, "Wait, what are you guys doing? What are you doing? Why is this important? Why are we paying for this?" And we almost got, the project almost had a very abrupt ending. Luckily, we explained it and they understood the value of it. But if you don't have that executive support, it's not going to work real well, and it's not going to stay real well. So that's critical to find that. And if you don't have that in your organization or whatnot, my advice is that's one of the first things you need to figure out is, where can we get that executive sponsorship? Somebody who can help us get the right budget, get aligned with the strategy, get work through the politics and all that other stuff at the organization. Somebody who can help do that so that we can be successful at what we're doing.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So before we go any further, I want to say that we're going to do our first set of Q&A. So if you have a question for either me or for Jeff, type it into the chat window, type a question to the organizer, and we'll take your questions. If you have questions about anything to do with growing UX, this is the time to do it. All right. While people are thinking of their questions and typing it in, let's talk about that. We said we had a special offer, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so let me talk about that. I'm going to describe it, and you tell me if I got it right, okay?
Sure thing. Yeah.
All right. So, Jeff, you're going to give a free consultation. Is this an on-the-phone consultation?
Yeah, on the phone,
okay.
or
on-the-phone consultation with the first 10 companies who schedule it. So all you have to do for this is, I assume, send you an email. Jeff, will that work?
Shoot me an email. Yeah, we've got contact info at the end, but just Jeff@balancedexperience.com will work.
Okay, and then the first 10 organizations who ask for it, you'll schedule that session with them, and you're gonna. You told me you're gonna talk about what's going on in their organization, what's the current situation, and discuss some ideas about how they might move forward in terms of growing UX, right?
Yeah, definitely. So kind of an informal conversation, but just really understand what's going on at their organization and try to think about what's the right way to approach that. So whether it's small, medium, large, whatever makes sense, and think about the right way to approach that.
Okay. And but this offer expires at the end of February. So send Jeff that email right away. The first 10 people, or the first 10 organizations, we'll say,
Right.
who send Jeff that email will get a free consultation. All right. So here's a question that has come in. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Mm-hmm.
question is, what if you don't have strong executive support, like you don't have it? How do you find it? How can you
Yeah,
find someone?
that's a good question. It's a hard one.
Yeah.
What some of the things
I
that,
have my suggestion too, by the way. So
oh, good. We'll see if you agree
we'll
with
see
any of
if
mine.
see if we have to come up with the same one or not.
Yeah, yeah. So I think some of the things to think about is one is don't be restricted to the org chart. So I would say, just because you're in a certain part of the organization, if your executive leadership in your part of the organization is not understanding it, doesn't value it, don't don't be limited by that. Look to the other parts of the organization. I used to teach a course on this, and one of the topics was, what's the right place in the organization for UX to live? And the right answer is it depends. It depends on wherever that support is. So I've seen UX live in an IT part of the organization, or product, or marketing, or all sorts of different areas. It just depends on where that person is. So I look broadly, look for that person. The other advice I would give is find a way to speak the business language. So take your good UX work, your success stories, and find a way to communicate how has that contributed to the business goals. So I don't want to just, hey, we had great usability tests, and we've got great designs, we've got whatever. Talk to me about how what you did contributed to change in sales, or a better conversion rate, or reduced development costs, or whatever is meaningful and tangible to the organization. Figure out a way to do that. That's going to start to get some attention. But I would say, make that a priority, is to find that support.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So one of the things I tell people, which is related a little bit to the last thing you said, because I actually had this with a client. So she had a very small UX group in one part of the organization, and she just felt like they were going nowhere. And that, they had
Mm-hmm.
the manager, the person above her, but that person was kind of interested in other things and had other
Mm-hmm.
groups underneath her. And so the idea was that UX wasn't growing. And she wanted to see, she actually wanted to see if she could attract a high level sponsor somewhere else in the organization.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she had, informally talked to people, and it still wasn't going anywhere. So what we did was we did what I call casting a wide net. So we planned a series of presentations, small group presentations. And these were, she actually brought me in to do part of the talk. So I would give a talk on, the psychology of design or something like that. And then she would also, while there, just give a brief presentation on what her group was doing. And we did this was like to really small groups. Like sometimes I've done this similar thing, and there's 150 people in the audience, so that would be another way to do it. But in this case, she kind of brought in like a dozen people at a time,
Mm-hmm.
from other groups and other departments in the organization. And the whole thing was um, billed as sharing what her group was doing. But actually, seriously, our goal is to attract a high level
Yeah.
sponsor.
Show off a little bit. Yeah.
And so she had we it was by invitation, and it was all like high level people. And I remember we did like 3 or 4 of these small group, and I remember at one of them, I was watching this one woman in the room, and she just got this look on her face. You could just see she was really thinking really hard. And
Mm-hmm.
all of a sudden, she started like writing some notes, scribbling really, really intently. And what had happened was, she'd had an aha moment, and she'd had a moment where she thought, wait a minute, wait a minute. I don't, I think later she said she was thinking either this group should be under me,
Mm-hmm.
or she was thinking, I want to start a group like this. So, and that was how, we attracted the high level. And I think what happened after that is, she approached she was like over here in the organization, but she approached the people where the UX group was.
Hmm.
and I don't, they made a deal or something, and the group moved over to her, and she was at a higher level, so she was able to give that sponsorship, and then the group really did take off after that. So I think
Super.
it's yeah, it's really important, but I think it's also can be really tricky because sometimes you feel like maybe the person above you is very supportive, but they're not very high in the organization, and the person
Hmm.
above them kind of isn't really aware of what's going on. Or sometimes, you feel like you're the person above you is at a high level, but is just kind of tolerating the
Right,
things
right.
that you want to do. So it can be really challenging to find someone, but um, I think that you do have to just keep talking. It's like I'm working on a white paper right now about how to market your group internally, and I
Hmm.
think you have to be continually educating and marketing what you're doing. And as you said, Jeff, you have to talk about it in ways that show the benefit to the organization. And I do think, as UX practitioners, um, we get really excited about design, and we get really excited about the work that we're doing, and to us it makes perfect sense, and of course it's valuable, and then we forget that other people aren't thinking about things the way we are, and we kind of have to do that translation so that they really see. Sometimes I'm always surprised by how much to me, it's like, oh, that's so obvious, right? How this would be
Right.
helpful, it's not obvious to them because they're in their head and I'm in my head, so we
Yeah,
have to
yeah.
make it obvious, right?
You do. Yeah, you got to show off a little bit, and you got to be able to speak their language a little bit so they understand why it's important.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. So again, if you have questions, please do continue to type those in, and we will answer them. All right. Let's move on. So I know the next thing that we're going to talk about is roadmaps
Hmm.
and UX roadmaps. And I know that uh, sometimes I help organizations put together, a UX roadmap. Here's what the UX group is headed towards. Whether it be a 1 year, a 6 month, 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, um, and it gives everyone that mental model about where we're headed in the short and the mid and the long term. And I think it helps to prioritize the projects that they might be working on. And I'm going to assume that you agree with that, but I also know that you have a caveat about roadmaps, right?
I do. I do. So, whoop, there we go. Double click there. I do. I mean, roadmaps definitely are useful, and it's great to be able to put together a roadmap in a sense. And sometimes that's a great first place to start. It gets everybody thinking about what's important and how are we going to get that done. But my caveat is don't be too rigid about the roadmaps. I've seen organizations treat it as a recipe, and we've got to do this before that, and we've got to do this much of this before we can do that much of that, and that can really slow you down. Just the realities of organizations. I've seen places where most folks want to bring in more staffing. We need more qualified people, or we need to get things done, and just aligning with your company's business cycle, or the politics at play or whatever. There are lots of things that happen at an organization that necessitate some flexibility. So what I would say is figure out the dimensions that you need to work on. Whether it's, we need better methods for doing our work, or we need to define our roles and responsibilities better, we need better standards, we need training for our staff. Whatever the categories are that make up the important things for your roadmap, keep those things in mind, but you got to be flexible. And the way I typically approach that is knowing what the dimensions are up front, working towards each of those dimensions when and where you can, trying to be opportunistic about addressing those. So, for example, I'm working with a client now. When I started, I wanted to focus for them on their methods and the roles and responsibilities. What's the work and who's going to be doing the work? Because it was a complicated thing for them. They were having a hard time with that. But the reality was, it's budget season. And so
Mm.
we need to figure out what we're going to be doing this coming year. And if we don't get things locked into a budget, it's not going to happen this year. And so we had to be flexible. It turned into we're budgeting. So we got to define some projects. We got to define new staffing, and it turned into that kind of conversation. So some of the other things got put on the back burner a little bit. We needed to make some assumptions. But now there's a budget in place to do some of these other things that need to get done. So,
And
roadmaps are
do you think
yeah,
they're
go ahead.
helpful though? Do
I
you
do.
think
I
it's
think
helpful to
roadmaps
have
are
them?
helpful to give you a place to start, or at least in defining those dimensions. But I don't want to. I wouldn't want you to treat them as a rigid recipe. So,
So
you know,
do you tell your clients then to go back and also and revisit the roadmap? I mean, is it or do you just kind of do it once and then be flexible in following it?
I think it depends on the client, but yeah, revisiting it now and then, at least to revisit where are we with the
Mm.
various dimensions we need to work on. We used to
Okay.
be really, good, bad, or whatever, anywhere. Revisit it and reprioritize.
Okay. So, but I have a question about this, which I think will
Yeah.
also then lead into our next one. And by the way, you got to remind me, what are we on? Is it we're on number 3?
This is number 3. Yeah, there's 2
Okay.
more.
Thank you. And then we're going to talk about the mistakes too, right?
Sure. Yep. Yep.
So, you're trying to grow your group, you're trying to grow UX, and then you have all these projects that you're probably working on at the same time. And this can be really overwhelming, right? Because now instead of just doing the project work, which is sometimes, based depending on how, your group is funded in the organization,
Hmm.
that may be the only official funding you have is to work on projects for other groups within the organization. But you're supposed to be working on the projects, but then you're supposed to be doing all this, UX infrastructure and growth and doing the roadmap. I mean, this can be, really daunting, right? I mean, it can be, it's hard to get the group to grow while you're also doing all these other things.
It is. It is. And so I think that gets at a couple of things. To your specific question there, Susan, I think it takes an investment to build the infrastructure and the strategy around what you want to do, because you've got to run your business. You've got to keep doing your day-to-day UX work, whether you're designing things or testing things or whatever. You've got to keep doing that. You can't just stop doing that work
Right.
and spend the next year or two putting together your standards and your
Although
methods
that
and
would
all
be
that fun stuff.
nice, wouldn't it?
It'd be really nice, but you can't do that. You got to run the business. So it does take an investment to get some of those other things in place, and that investment will pay off. And that's a fun, different conversation about how
How do you get
the
that? How do you
value of
show
that
that it's
investment.
going to pay off?
Right, but you gotta be able to do both things at the same time, and there are different strategies for how do you do that. But you got to do both of those things at the same time. And this topic that we've got here on the slide is be resourceful, and that plays out in a couple of different ways. One is there's never enough qualified people to do what we want to do. So there's not good qualified UX people knocking on the door ready to come join us. There's just not enough of us out there to do everything we want to do. And so organizations that are willing to do this and willing to invest in it, we tend to need to be creative and resourceful in finding qualified people to do the things that we need to do. So you can, of course, look to hire new qualified, good UX people, but you're going to need to also explore things like internal folks, maybe some folks who appreciate this or come from another part of the organization that close skill set. Maybe you kind of retrain some folks. You got to be resourceful with who you've got, what you've got. Maybe you're going to bring in some outside help to plug some gaps and partnerships and whatnot, but you're going to have to be resourceful with your people. You're probably going to need to be resourceful with your tool sets, the things you use to get your job done, whether that's for collaboration or design or whatnot.
Mm.
You're going to need to be resourceful. Don't take no for an answer. Find another way to solve the problem and prioritize. So I would say don't get stuck. So find another way to be successful.
Well, talking about getting stuck, like what
Yeah.
are some of the roadblocks that you find, in organizations that want to grow UX? What are some of the things that seem to block them
I
from
would say,
growth?
yeah, one of the first blocks is people. So finding enough good people to get the work done. well, let me back up. We've talked about finding good executive support, so that's probably one of the first things.
Right, we did
Finding
talk
that
about that.
support.
Yep.
Right. So assuming you've got support and you want to get this work done, finding people to get it done is difficult in today's world. It's hard to just, hey, we're going to hire 10 great people and they'll be here in 2 months. That's not going to happen. So finding the right people to get the right things done and prioritizing when you can't get everybody that you want when you want. I think that's one roadblock, if you will. Another has to do with roles and responsibility, and that can be a long conversation in an organization because if you're going through this process, it's typical, or it's likely that stuff's been happening in the past, and who does what, who owns what. And,
Do you mean like the UX group versus the business analyst, that kind of thing?
Yeah, it could be
Okay.
that, or the product group is always the ones that make the
Right.
final
Okay.
decision on this, and
Okay.
but
Okay.
product group's not the one that understands this, that, and the other thing. So
Yeah.
who owns what decisions, who contributes to what, who does what work, those kinds of decisions can take a while to get through.
Right. Okay. All right.
Those are some of the things, yeah.
So here's a totally different question.
Sure.
Because we're about to talk now about number 4 of the 5, right?
I think resourceful is number 4.
Oh, so we're talking about number 5. Okay.
Yeah.
So how much, you've been given ideas, we've been talking about different advice. How much do you change this advice? Like, does it depend on the particular organization that you're working with, or are these, would you give the same advice no matter who you're working with?
Yeah, so to me that speaks to the fifth point here, which is every organization's a little bit different. So I would say the structure of the conversation is going to be similar no matter who we're talking with or who I'm talking with. We're going to talk about roles and responsibility and tools and staffing and training. We're going to talk about the same kinds of things, but how we have those conversations, how do we connect those conversations to your organization is going to be different everywhere. So, for example, I've got the 2 clients now that I would say opposite ends of the spectrum. We've got one client who's a Fortune 100 client, very large international organization, very slow moving because they're so large, and they're in the manufacturing space. That's a different kind of conversation, a different pace to decision making, and it's a different set of expectations. The other client is a small, essentially a startup, got about 150 employees. They're agile, they're fast moving, it's a new industry, they're doing cool stuff, and helping them figure out how do we get UX built in and baked into what we do. That's a fast moving, dynamic kind of conversation. So we're still talking about getting good people, doing the right work, having the right tools to do it, getting the right support. We're still talking about those dimensions, but how we talk about it and how we frame it, the terminology we use, that's gonna change at every organization.
I know one of the things that I've talked to some of my clients about before is I'll ask them, how does change happen in your organization? So right. Because it's different, so they'll, for some of them they'll say, well, things, we change, once a year or once every 2 years we seem to do this major change, and so it seems that it's built in. And so then I'll say, okay, then you have to figure out, when's the next change coming, and can you kind of get in there with the things you want to change? Some of my clients say, well, things change when there's a big problem, like we have a big mistake or error that the world finds out about, and then we do a major change. Some people say change occurs, because you've gotten the attention of a certain person, or change occurs when you do an interesting project and so finds out about it. So figure out how have you seen change happen in that organization, because it's different, and then figure out how can you kind of wend your way into that if what you want to do is grow UX.
Exactly. Yeah. So I've had organizations that it's maybe an engineering organization or kind of a Six Sigma kind of manufacturing kind of organization, and for them it's all about we need data, we need to measure things, we need to prove stuff, and so all right, How do we now measure our UX, connect that to their business metrics? How do we have those conversations to get past that and convince them that that's the right way, and these are the directions to make change?
Yeah, and
That's one culture.
there's two other things I want to mention. One is, I talk a lot about the power of social validation, right? So one of the most powerful things you can do is to get if you have, for instance, internal clients, projects you've worked on, is to get them talking to their peers about the work you did for them. They can be great evangelists, right? And they might be the one to start saying, hey, boy, too bad we don't have more people in the UX group that could work on. Or I'd sure like to have them work on more of my project. You should have them work on your project, right? So you actually have someone else do the talking for
Exactly.
you.
We talked earlier about making change. How do we make change? Finding evangelists like that's great. Get them out there. Yeah. Get them to talk about you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to have another Q&A for those of you who have some questions. You can type them in. I see some of you typed in questions in the question box, so that's great. So you can type them in there. If you type them in the chat, I'll see them there as well. Before we do that, though, before we take another round of questions, you have a couple of mistakes that you wanted to talk to. So those were the 5 things that would help you grow UX. But how about some of the mistakes that you've seen people make when they're trying to grow UX?
Sure. And we've touched upon a few of these already, but I think the first mistake that I would point out is assuming that we can solve all of our problems by hiring more good people. That's usually we like hiring.
Well, wait a minute. You want to grow UX. Why wouldn't you go hire people? What's wrong with this?
Exactly. We like that. But number one, there's not enough of them probably. But number two, that's usually the first response that comes from some senior leadership. Hey, we're ready. We want to make UX a core part of what we do. We want to be really good at it. So go out and hire me a good team. So okay, well, you're going to need a good team. But that's not the only answer. And how big a team do you need? And what kind of skills? And what are they going to do? And we need to figure out a lot of other stuff too. So assuming that we're going to, that a bigger team is the answer to everything is a risk. I would say be careful to not assume that just hiring more good people, because you're probably just going to have more good people doing the same ad hoc reactionary kind of work then. And then you just got more people running around scrambling.
That's interesting. So you're growing UX in terms of growing the numbers of UX people, but not necessarily growing the influence of UX.
Exactly. So you want to figure out. I talked about that infrastructure. You got to plan to build the infrastructure so there's not just a bunch of people and projects. So you got to build that infrastructure. I think that's one big gotcha that folks have.
Okay.
Another is, and we talked about rigidity a lot. I think being too rigid in how we want to make UX successful can cause a lot of problems. So if we've got in our heads, here's how UX should be. This is the holy grail of a UX team or UX strategy, and being rigid and forcing that into the organization is going to cause a lot of problems. So being flexible in terms of where you're finding your influence, how you're staffing your team, what with the order in which you're working on your different strategic
or what you even do on projects.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So you know what? Maybe we aren't the ones that are doing all the detailed design work.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody else is another part of the organization that's going to own that. Okay. Well, we're going to focus on requirements and validation or whatever. Be flexible. So I think that's a big one. And I guess the third one is to stay connected to the rest of the organization.
Wait a minute. So what's the mistake?
The mistake is not. The mistake,
okay, I thought you were saying staying connected was a mistake.
Right,
no,
right. No. So not being connected, not being woven into the other parts of the organization. And the place where I see that the most is is setting up a set of UX methods in isolation of everything else. So here's how we're gonna.
Here's how we do what we do.
Here's how we do UX, because this is the right way to do UX.
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden, no, now we've just got another thing for the organization to worry about. Well, we got to do that UX stuff also. So instead of doing that, find the way work happens already, whether it's your software development methodology, your project management, your product management, whatever the current and well adopted method for getting work done is, find a way to connect your UX stuff to it. So don't create a whole other thing. Find a way to fit in with what's already there and what's already working. You'll be a lot more successful that way.
Interesting points. Okay, so let's see. We've got a couple questions in that I have for you to ask you. And before we do that, though, I want to remind everyone that we have a free offer. Jeff will consult with your organization for free via phone or teleconference to the first 10 organizations that email him, jeff@balancedexperience.com. Okay, and that expires at the end of February. All right, so here's a couple more questions. One is, will a recording of this webinar be available afterwards? And the answer is yes, and I'll send out an email and you'll get that. Then we have another question. Is there ever a time when you would suggest that a UX team not try and grow?
Kind of, yeah. I think I talked about staffing isn't the solution. Adding more people isn't always the solution. So I would be very careful about simply hiring more people to do the same old stuff. So I would caution any client to say, why are we growing, and are we growing in a way that's sustainable and valuable? If all we're doing is throwing more good UX people at the problem, I'm happier than had we done nothing. But I'd rather spend a little bit of our time and energy building some of that infrastructure for the growth of the team. So I'd be a little cautious if that's all we're doing.
Okay. All right, and here's another question that I know I've gotten this one a number of times too from my clients, which is if we're going to hire UX people, should we hire people who are generalists, or should we hire in specialists to do certain parts of the UX work?
I think that depends on where you're at with the growth of the team. Usually if you're near the beginning, I would usually recommend generalists, because the nature of the work's gonna flow a little bit, and you're gonna need people to be able to step in and be successful in different ways as you evolve and as you grow the team. So I would recommend that early in that central function to be generalists. As you get more mature as a group and as the organization understands UX a little bit better, then I think you can start to get specialized skill sets. You may have a specialized design team in a different kind of research team. You may have folks who are focusing on different aspects. But I think early on, safer to get good generalists, just because it provides you a little bit more flexibility.
Okay.
Is that what you've seen in your organizations you've worked with?
Yes, although I also think sometimes I think, if you know that you have a hole, right? Like we don't have people who have enough user research skills or information architecture skills, and even though you may feel like you don't have enough generalists yet, if you find a good person, maybe you should bring them in because, as you said, and it's an interesting thing that, it's hard to find. I know that you're in the process of trying to find some UX people for one of your clients, and it can be really challenging, especially depending on where the client is, and whether there's a whole pool of UX people that are living geographically in that part of the world. So sometimes I think you should grab good people if they appear.
I hear you. Be flexible.
Yeah. So here's another one, which is again about hiring UX people. Is it better to hire from the outside someone who has a lot of experience, or to train from the inside with people who may not have a lot of user experience at this time?
Yeah. I think a blend is probably best. Got I've had clients where sometimes the domain is very um, either specific or takes a lot of background to really understand the domain well enough
Like
to
if you
be
have a
successful.
manufacturing company or,
Right.
railroading or something like that.
Exactly. So, understanding the vagaries of what's railroading all about and what do I need to worry. Having somebody who's maybe been at the organization and understands that part of it and can be trained a little bit to, or mentored a little bit to be a UX person there, that's got a lot of value. Sometimes it's a lot easier to do that just for budgetary reasons. Hey, we're not allowed to hire anybody. No new headcount this year. Okay, well, let's find somebody who's already here and take advantage of that. So that's good. On the other hand, it can be very valuable. It can be really a shot in the arm to find somebody external who's got a lot of experience, really, really good at what they do on the UX side or human factors or whatever, and just bring them into the team. And I think that can raise the performance of the group as a whole and the other people around us. So I think a balance is important for different reasons.
Yeah, yeah. Jeff, I know that you work a lot with remote teams.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, any special challenges you want to mention with growing UX if your team is like not all in one place?
Yeah, I'd say first of all, don't be afraid of that. There are some organizations where that makes them very nervous. How will we manage that? How will we be able to work together? You're on a different time zone or whatever. Don't be afraid of it. I do think there are some things that are going to be difficult to do remotely. Depending on the pace of work at your organization or the culture. There are some things where you're going to need to be co-located to get work done, but there are other things that can be very successful remotely. Certainly things like your detailed design, sometimes testing and validation can be done remotely very well. Sometimes there are great geographic reasons why a distributed remote team is important. If you've got an organization that works around the globe, sometimes it's
Mm-hmm.
useful to have people around the globe working on things. So I would just say don't be afraid of it. Sometimes you're going to need to explore that just because that's the only option you've got, because that's all that's available or that's all you're able to make happen or whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Jeff, I want to thank you so much. You have I think, a slide that'll kind of
Yeah,
wrap
we'll
us
just
up and also show people where they can reach you.
absolutely,
And
yeah, just kind of recapping what we talked about. It's
yeah.
the first one is it's a process, not a project. Be flexible. Don't approach everything like it's a project because it's going to be hard to make that fit every time. It takes great leadership. So if you don't have UX leadership, find it, make that a top priority. So go out, market yourself, find it, be flexible in where you find that thing. Speaking of being flexible, figure out where you can be most effective, where you've got the most leverage. That may be the people you know, that may be the projects you can work on. Find where you can be the most effective and adjust to that. And then be resourceful. Be resourceful in terms of what work you're doing, how you find good people, where they're located, like we just talked about. But be resourceful in how you approach building your team. And the last thing is understand your culture. Understand how the culture of your organization uh, affects how decisions are made, affects how work gets done, and adapt to the culture, speak that language. So those are really the 5 things we talked about here today. And lastly, that's me. I appreciate the time today, Susan, and like
Oh, it's
like
been
we talked
great.
about earlier, if happy to talk with folks, anybody who's interested in the near future.
And one of the things I would ask of everyone who attended, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And if you have ideas for future webinars for me or for Jeff or for me and Jeff, please let me know. You can send me an email. I'll be sending out an email with the recording. Maybe you want to respond back to that and let me know your ideas. So we're always looking for great ideas for webinars. So I want to thank you again, Jeff, and thanks to everyone who attended, and we will say